I just kind of wanted to mention that I've had the pleasure of working with Carice at the Shots Energy Research Center, and they've been an integral partner to our energy journey, and having Cal Poly Humboldt as project partners and higher education institutes with dedicated staff members, including, professors and the students, has been absolutely critical to our journey. So I just wanted to mention and acknowledge Carice for some of the work her and her team have been side by side with local tribes. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and let her know how much I do appreciate that. So with that, I'm sure you can see the title slide. This is taken with a drone photo, and you can see the Trinity River that moves throughout the valley. This is just one little district of the valley. As you can see, it's densely forested and it's rural in nature. I need to be on my, I'm not sure why it's not following suit. Give me 1 second, so sorry. There we go. For those of you that don't know, the Hoopa Valley Indian Reservation is located in Humboldt County. We are in Northeast Humboldt. By land base, the Hoopa Valley Tribe has the largest land base in the state of California. Throughout the country, there's 574 federally recognized tribes. 109 of those are actually located within the state, and there's other state recognized tribes as well that don't have that federal authority, but are indigenous nations to this region as well. So California has a wealth of native populations. So I just kind of wanted to give some presence and reference to where I sit and the projects that I'm going to be speaking about today. I wanted to show you a map of our Hoopa Aboriginal territory, and just to kind of mention that the reservation of Hoopa is Hoopa, but the Hoopa people are largely spelled different. So if you're looking at the distinctions in spelling, Hupa is more reference to the people, and Hoopa is more of the land-based place. This map shows our original Aboriginal territory, which is far encompassing of the actual land that was granted through executive authority. And that's true for most tribes. We had a wide array of villages that were located in the mountains and along the rivers. This is a rich area of different watersheds and resources. So the square box that you kind of see is the actual reservation boundary. There's been different land allocations that have been granted to the tribe, but technically that's called the Hoopa Square. But you can see the Aboriginal territory is much larger than that. My cultural background is I'm a member of the Hoopa Valley Tribe. I'm also a descendant of the Yurok tribe, Wiyot, Yurok, and Tolowa, and that's most of the north coast regions. And that's something that I hold near and dear to my family lineage. So we're from, the north coast area to this beautiful region. But I wanted to share the difference and nuance between the land granted through executive authority as opposed to our actual territory. So this is a picture of a honta, and it's spelled Xontah. These were our traditional houses. They're located half above ground, half below. And that is for, protection from the elements. It provides cooling in the summers and heating in the winters, and it condenses, all of the resources. I wanted to mention that through carbon dating, they've had fire and test pits that date us back to at least 10 to 12,000 years. There's some variances in that data, but if you think about the history of that, that's kind of where we're at with our traditional history here. So that's a long period of time. The picture on our right is a traditional ceremonial dress. It's largely made out of deerskin. It has abalone, braided bear grass, pine nuts, some of those traditional elements. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of our cultural flair. Again, we've been here for thousands of years. I wanted to kind of back to the land acknowledgement. We're talking about US government history and when technically the Hoopa Valley Reservation was established. So although we're talking about us being here for 10 to 12,000 years, Ulysses S. Grant was the president from 1869 to 1877. The Hoopa Reservation was created by executive order in 1876. The West Coast has a different nuance than the East Coast was with pre-contact. There's a span of several hundred years where we had less contact with less Europeans, if you will, which kind of helped us to preserve a piece of our original homeland and some of our practices. So again, Hoopa was created in 1876. I manage the Hoopa Valley Public Utilities District. We are a chartered entity of the Hoopa Valley Tribe. We're established in 1982 through Tribal Council resolution. And we started off as only serving our domestic water. So the state of California does not have regulatory authority here. So we report to the US EPA as a federal government to government contract. So we produce the domestic water, irrigation, and some of the other critical facilities. But having the Hoopa Public Utilities, we have a 5-member board of directors, which is our governing board. So we have approvals for purchases, contracts, grant submissions. All of the governing body authority is handled through our elected board of directors, which gives us a little bit of autonomy and quicker business transactions. Going through the tribal council, they only have 2 meetings a month, and there's 60 other departments that have agenda items as well. So having a streamlined chartered entity is definitely beneficial to Hoopa's facility and how we function. So this is a picture of us in the building. We have additional staff now. We have a very small but mighty team. Our staff is not all pictured, but largely we're comprised of Hoopa tribal members as well as other natives that have families and that grew up here. So we're very proud to produce some of the functions that we do. In relation to COVID, we started a broadband division. So the broadband division is only 5 years old. And I'll talk a little bit about how that impacts the energy projects moving forward, but it kind of goes hand in hand with connectivity, with infrastructure needed to really transmit and operate those energy management systems, data transmission, data collection, and those things. So the broadband really kind of has a play in all of these things. So those are some of the functions that we provide, and we have multiple divisions here. So Hoopa is within a tier 2, tier 3 fire threat district. And I know that we've all seen the recent fires that are happening in Southern California, which I'm sure, as you can see, is very alarming. Technically, we are in the winter months and we don't see these type of events happening usually in the summer. So for these things to be happening at this level is very alarming. We have wildfires here every single year, which always impacts basic communications, emergency services. It impacts the power and how we all overall deal with PSPS events, EPSS events, and those are shut-off procedures through our IOU or investor-owned utility PG&E for emergency issues. If there's weather issues that are happening, they will shut down entire circuits, which impacts our overall energy resiliency and reliability. And that's for protection. So those, if in case a wildfire happens, the wires are not livened, further igniting the fires. So again, I think that we're seeing this to be a more widespread issue, not just in densely forested areas, but throughout the state and country. So I just wanted to give you a picture. You can see this is taken from Bald Hill at one of our communication towers. You can see for as far as the eye can see, there's densely forested area. The Valley 4 is really only comprised of about 3,500 acres. The rest is a mountainous region. We had a recent land acquisition of over 10,000 acres. So that brings Hoopa's total acreage to about 110,000 acres. Most of that is densely forested regions. So I was recently on a panel with the CPUC about equity metrics and how that plays down in distribution planning. And so we were looking at Cal Enviro's map of disadvantaged communities, which is one metric that they use in order to plan out their distribution for 1 to 5 year plans. The left side shows the state of California. Most of those regions that are considered disadvantaged are located within Southern California. And on the right, you see the top portions of the Hoopa Reservation, and then the long portion that rises to the north is the Yurok Reservation. And so both of those tribal regions in Northern California are considered disadvantaged, which has different nuances with how projects are designed, planned out, and funding is set forth ultimately. So the PG&E is our service territory. It's pretty much the Bay Area all the way north. This slide was pulled from their 2023 annual electric reliability report. It's several hundred-page document. There's 33 individual circuits. It's a requirement of the California Public Utilities Commission, which is their regulator, to provide metrics of how their system is performing. The average PG&E customer throughout the whole territory experiences 255.9 outage minutes per year. So 256 minutes per year is the annual time that your average customer is without power. And I want you to hold that 255 in your head. So the next portion, so our circuit is called the Hoopa 1101 circuit. It's 143 miles that serves multiple tribal communities. The Hoopa 1101 circuit is located on 2 of their tables. One for the worst performing circuit, the top 1% of the worst performing circuits. It has the top number of outage frequencies and also on the table of duration minutes on the outages. So before I mentioned the average customer experiences 256 minutes per year, the Hoopa 1101 circuit, as you can see from PG&E's own data, we experience 2,447 outage minutes per year, which equates to 9.6 times the average. Let's round it and call it even because I like round numbers. We're going to call that 10 times the average outage minutes that experiences of PG&E customers. So that results in lack of energy resiliency during hot areas. So it's the lack of AC cooling. In the winter, that means lack of heat. For utilities, that means, the water, we have 2 water treatment plants, 20 water storage tanks, 12 pumping stations. Again, when the power is out, we don't have a way for option unless we have backup generation. We're trying to get rid of fossil fuels, but we rely on those propane or diesel generators to provide critical facilities. So it impacts critical utilities. Sometimes the cell towers, the generator will malfunction. So we need to maintain critical communications during that time. So when there's energy outages at a metric of 10 times the amount, that allows for additional capacity and additional ways that we have to completely function. So again, we're 10 times the average PG&E customer. I wanted to show you, and this kind of talks about climate change. The picture on your left was a storm event on Highway 299. And during this storm, they're calling it an atmospheric river. So we had a lot of trees topple. It closed down the complete highway and a mass amount of tree removal had to occur. What this caused is if trees fall, they're going to snap those aerial power lines, causing outages. For a safety reason, they have to shut down the entire grid so they can do inspections, so they're able to do repairs safely. But again, that causes mass outages. On the right, you see winter storm events where the weight of the snow can also snap those trees, again, impacting lines. Two kind of different pictures, but the same. On when there's the river, if we're dealing with drought conditions, the soil might not be stable enough to hold the soil and the tree up. So when there's a mass amount, a deluge of water, we're having those same kind of impacts. And as we see, climate change can be from one range to a complete drought. And on the other hand, it could be these huge storms with a mass amount of water entering the system. So we are impacted by both. When we're looking at how tribal nations, and this doesn't just apply to the Hoopa tribe, we're looking at the metrics of how funding is shaped, how we are considered in distribution, transmission upgrades, plannings. Again, we meet all metrics. We're considered a disadvantaged community. We're also an environmental and social justice community, so we meet both of those definitions. We have a high level of people that are enrolling in the care programs, so your low-income programs, your federal low-income programs, and your medical baseline. Community characteristics, I showed you the disadvantage map that showed tribal communities within their areas of need. And we also have issues with energization of our projects. So for the utility, I was waiting several years to have our critical water storage tanks, which sat empty and dormant, just waiting on electrification from PG&E. If someone is developing a new piece of property or a home, sometimes those families with multiple generations are living off of a generator because of the time for energization, which can be easily a year or two. And if you've ever had to live off of a generator or use it for any amount of time, it's constant refueling, you're hooking up daisy chaining power strips and power cords just to keep the heating and cooling on, your refrigerator safe, your freezer. A lot of tribes have traditional subsistence, so it might be the deer or the salmon we're trying to protect. Our food storage, which is any to even to get to Costco or a major store, is at least an hour to an hour and a half drive. So those things are critically important. It's refrigeration of medicines and things that are critical. So it's really impactful. So when we talk about funding, when we talk about investment of energy on tribal nations, again, we are looking at all of these factors of which we meet every single definition. I wanted to then not be so hindrance and talk about what we're doing to solve the issue. What are we bringing to the table to work with our IOU, to work with regional partners so we can help facilitate this? So on the planning side, we have several planning grants. We have several from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Energy Mineral Development Program, which is EMDP. We have planning grants, which is helping support design analysis and some of that foundational work needed to get to construction. We also have a Tribal Energy Development Capacity Grant with the Bureau. We've worked with our local nonprofit, so the Humble Area Foundation is able to provide some philanthropic funding for a tribal climate resilience network. All of these things help fund staff time, some of the internal studies that are needed, and it takes all of these projects to be able to fund and meet these goals. On the construction side and implementation side, we have a grant that is the Regional Resilience Grant Program being implemented by Redwood Coast Energy Authority. They're a local CCA in our region, and that is providing energy resiliency and will provide a small microgrid for our Hoopa Fire Department. This next one I'm going to talk about is a pain point for me right now. So collectively, the Terrace project, so Terrace is Tribal Energy Resilience and Sovereignty Funds. So Terrace was funded by the U.S. Department of Energy. It is a 6-party application that has been awarded. And the lead applicant is Redwood Coast Energy Authority in partnership with Schatz Energy Research Center and 4 sovereign tribes. So for us to come together and kind of unite and submit this application, we weren't successful on our first application, but the second one, we kind of condensed it and provided a regional approach to it. Luckily, we were funded. And now with the new change in administration, clean energy projects, the funding is on hold. So for the years that we've put in with the design, the analysis, the MOAs between sovereign tribal governments, getting us to agree to come together because we're stronger together as a regional group. That's kind of unknown right now. We were going through final negotiation with the U.S. Department of Energy staff members and had expected signed agreements in the next several months. So what we're trying to do is work with Congressman Huffman and Senator Padilla and Adam Schiff and some of our local representatives to kind of help push this on a national level because of the rollback and the pause on what the administration's goals are. That's something that is very scary because of the things that I talked about. So we're looking at critical energy resiliency issues here. We're looking at all of those metrics that I represented. We're looking at climate change. We're looking at tribal sovereignty and self-determination. So we can bring resources together in partnership with PG&E and the IOU to try and solve these issues. So it's very concerning to me that these projects will potentially not happen. I'm hoping that's not the case, but it's a stark reality that we're faced with right now, and we're going to push as hard as we can. With that, we're also applying for a PG&E Community Microgrid Incentive Program. We are in the last stages of technology solutions with their tech staff. And we're also working with the California Energy Commission on the long duration energy storage project. So it seems like we have all of these grants, but collectively, it's almost like having the stars align to have the funding necessary to make this all a reality. So we're simultaneously with a small staff kind of implementing multiple grants through philanthropic and local, through federal and also state grant funding. So that's kind of what we have on the table right now as far as energy resiliency solutions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Terrace project. And you can see from the bottom, this is all a collective partnership. It is a nested microgrid project that spans over multi-tribal areas. It also helps the Blue Lake Rancheria on their side. They have been a regional, state, and national leader as far as tribal microgrids go. They have the ability to island, offset energy, and function when there are outages in the region. And they have been a really tried and true example of tribal energy sovereignty and tribal-owned microgrids. So with that, you can see some of the partners that I talked about that have been awarded, and this is the project that I talk about that is potentially on hold. Hope not. So I don't know if you get into the technical aspects of it, but energy resiliency and technology, we have a microgrid core zone. PG&E substation is actually located within the Hoopa Reservation. That one substation also serves the downriver and upriver communities. So that's the Yurok tribe, that's Orleans, which is the Karuk tribal designations. And these are supposed to be paired to where they can help and offset each other. And then when there's issues with the line, let's say a line snaps, they're able to island and then serve their own territories. So they can be complementary to themselves, or they can close off and kind of serve their own mini circuit. This is the goal here. All three of these tribes are also working on broadband projects. So there's going to be fiber optic infrastructure that also connects these projects. The Hoopa Valley Tribe has a $64 million project where we're building a data center, we're building fiber to the home, we're building communication towers, workforce development, all of those things. I'm just going to take a quick drink and then. So when we're talking about match funding for all of those grants that I talked about, the match funding for these projects cannot be federal funds. So although this microgrid project is going to utilize the fiber optic infrastructure, we were not able to use a single penny of that as match funding. So the project was awarded $87 million. We simultaneously, as a group, had to come up with an additional $87 million of non-federal match. That is a hefty feat to try and achieve. But with that, between all of the partners, we're able to come up and meet those metrics. So the idea here is to have a tribally owned microgrid. It's a regional approach to the circuit that is in the top worst performing circuits in the region. We're coming up to the table to meet our investor-owned utility where they're at, provide resources, and come up with long-term solutions to help energy resiliency, to have clean energy that's helping adapt to climate mitigation and self-determination, and those things that I've kind of already mentioned. So along with all of the other considerations, the tribe for itself is looking at what the ownership models look like. There's legal and regulatory considerations. So along with our staff, we have expert energy attorneys, because if anyone has had to deal with legal and regulatory, it gets very concise. So we need expertise on our side. So we're dealing with, how can tribes become an energy provider, looking at those integration documents, looking at all the legal and regulatory things. So you absolutely need a legal arm. We're also looking at the business pro forma analysis. What are the overhead costs for these systems? There's a lot of different complexities to that. So you need business pro forma analysis. What is the technology selection? I mentioned the long duration energy storage grant. And with that is a different battery composition other than lithium ion. So we're having to look at those technology selections, which are yet not shown and proved because it's a new system. What does that look like for environmental and cultural protection? As you saw from the overhead picture, we have very close proximity to the river. We wouldn't want to contaminate or cause harm. So it's almost like taking doing your due diligence, doing your research, having people be able to look at these metrics so you can make informed decisions on the technology. We've talked about match funding, and that's a skill set in its own. There's grant writing that's needed, dealing with philanthropic and bridge funding. And the tax credits and incentives are another issue that the administration might pull back. So for clean energy projects that meet their guidelines, you can get construction support once a project is up and running. There's specific IRS models that you have to meet and follow, which is another expertise. And we're looking at US government administrative changes. So along with just building a project, seeking funding, these are all the kind of multifaceted things that we also have to deal with. I was glad to be a part of the CEC and the California Public Utilities Commission had a tribal en banc meeting that was held at Cal Poly Humboldt. You can see kind of from the picture that all of the commission members were there and representatives from each tribe, including myself. The state of California approved resolution 23-03209, committing to support California tribal energy sovereignty. Acknowledging tribes' sovereign jurisdictions, acknowledging all the disparities that have happened, the lack of investment, And largely, if you're dealing with a rural and tribal area, there's not a ton of return on investment on these projects. So it's not a ton of customers, but for us, it's absolutely critical and necessary to have these upgrades and to have these projects be implemented within our region. It just doesn't help our community. It's also the neighboring region that we're trying to help and address. Um, and with that, that was kind of the end. And I'm hoping that there's some questions, and I'm hoping to learn from, the graduate students on the line as well. So I'm open to any questions, if there were any. So thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Linnea. Everyone join me for a round of virtual applause, please. Thank you so much. And so I have a list of questions here that Paco and Elsa and myself, as the organizers, have jotted down, and we'll start off with a few of those, but definitely welcome others to chime in. So one of the questions we have for you, Linnea, is about how this microgrid might be enabling other social and environmental efforts in the tribe, and like how tribal members have been interacting with or reacting to the plans for the microgrid development.
Right. So one, our planned project requires use of land. So when I talked about land configurations, there's only 3,500 acres on the valley floor, which is largely where our residents are located. I don't want to make everybody dizzy, but I want to go back to that first slide. If I can, I don't know, I don't want to do that, but anyway, so you're looking at a project that is going to take up area for solar panels. Carissa, you've kind of been out here and done some of those solar analysis. So we are going to have to designate the use of land, for the solar panels, the grounding that's needed, a location for the battery. And to be perfectly honest, there's mixed signals, and tribal council has expressed some issues, with battery composition. There's been things on the news where, these batteries have ignited and caused fires. I know that there's some of the issues that we're kind of considering and having to make important decisions on. I think that I know that people want energy resiliency, but what does that really look like? They have to understand that these projects take a long time, and really we have a 5 to 6 year term to where this is even going to be up and running. So we're looking at 2030 if we start today without pause and funding for this to be up and running, providing benefits. And if you look at the social and inequity that still occurs with the outages I talked about, with the energy metrics, for not being included in distribution planning, for not being in having the regulator mandate that the top worst performing circuits are invested in. And that's kind of a complex issue when you're dealing with the CPUC. There's a lot of different rulings and creation of laws that are at play. And there's different specific topics for each of those. And you really need an attorney to kind of keep your eye on, how these you really need to submit comments to record. You need to submit the tribe's goals and what we'd like to achieve here. So with that, the Hoopa Valley Tribe really only has a couple of attorneys on staff. Our tribe is comprised of 60 different departments. That's, tribal council and everything from medical to our police, to our fire, to social services, to utilities. So you think about 60 different type of topics. Legal resources are expensive, and they're hard to come by. So we've really tried our best to secure funding to have that legal expertise. But I know that people are still struggling to pay the increased price hikes. I'm sure that you all kind of deal with that. There were two price hikes recently. One was for undergrounding and one, I can't remember what the other one was for, but we have people in the valley that have an all electric home, and sometimes they're paying $600 to $800 per month. And I don't know how that's affordable for anybody, let alone renting your basic needs. I think that the cost of energy is becoming higher and higher. And as I also work kind of on the offshore team, looking at, you know, what is the impacts of that. That's also an industry to me that is up in the air. Humboldt County is slated to potentially have 2 offshore wind leases off of our coast, build out in our harbor, and the whole state of California's grid is going to have to be upgraded in order to transport the energy that will be generated. It will not be needed locally as much as you're going to transport down to the Bay Area, Southern California, but who's going to pay for a complete grid overhaul? And that answer is largely ratepayers. So how much of the onus can we put back on customer costs when we're already kind of struggling with, you know, economic development and, you know, job access and the things that we deal with here on the reservation and probably statewide? So when I think about social justice and equity, is like, how much can we really take on and put back on the customer base in order to achieve those goals? And that's kind of a far spread and far reaching question that comes down to kind of state regulators as well. I don't know if I answered the question, but that's where I went.
Totally, totally, and more. Yeah, thank you
Okay.
for that. Really insightful and for highlighting just the complexity and significance of this, tackling this issue. Um, Another one for you. This one is pretty broad, so you're welcome to address whatever you'd like within it. But we're wondering what lessons can be learned from challenges faced by tribes that are attempting to develop energy projects on their lands.
What challenges? So I've been at the utility now for 5.5 years. Out of all the divisions, including water, solid waste management, even the facilitation of business functions, broadband, I find energy to be the most complex. When I really started dealing with a deep dive of what that is, there's way different nuances between generation, between the transmission, between the distribution, between integration, departing load charges, the tax incentives. And so I would really, some of the challenges have been to actually have kind of a strategic energy plan and analysis to look at, you know, what are the tribe's current statistics? What are your goals to help customers? One thing that I didn't really mention was that the Hoopa Valley Tribe has an allocation through the Western Area Power Administration, which is largely called WAPA. So we have a specific amount of energy that's generated through largely hydro dams, where we're given a certain allocation. And instead of PG&E providing the delivery load for those locations, we serve the power for 30 critical anchor institutions, such as our medical facility, such as our shopping center and our mini mart. So we have 30 locations where our WAPA allocation is serving the power as opposed to PG&E. We do pay a WDT, which is a wholesale distribution tariff to PG&E to utilize their distribution and transmission lines. When I started looking into that allocation, you have scheduling coordinator services to make sure that the power is moved to be able to serve those delivery points. You have a program administrator. And if we over exceed our allocation through WAPA, then our scheduling coordinator will buy blocks of energy out on the open market through CAISO at an escalated rate. So that's another thing that we're kind of looking at. And also what the challenge of that is, since technically those delivery points are not served as a PG&E customer, that makes us ineligible for PG&E programs that are rate-based programs, even though we're paying an exorbitant amount through that tariff into the support of their system. So because we're paying the distribution tariff for distribution and transmission, we still are ineligible for those 30 locations. And like I said, they're critical locations: our fire department, our medical facility, those some of our utility, our water treatment plant. And actually the water treatment plant is the highest demand location within the reservation. So when you talk about challenges, it's taking me so long to really understand the different nuances of where is energy generated from? We're still using nuclear plants, and so the plant on the North Coast that they would like to kind of upgrade and remediate, where does that energy come from? How is it transported? Where are your lines located? What are the size of those lines? Throughout the energy metrics conversation the other day, we're talking about, like, what is your grid's overhead capacity? How much room do you have additional load? So if the tribe wanted to kind of develop a new location that had a higher energy demand, that's not guaranteed that the grid can actually support that. So it's really understanding your grid capacity, what it takes to upgrade those, what the legal documents necessary to create that, and working within the IOU's timelines. I told you I tried to upgrade a water storage tank, and we almost lost our match funding because we could not complete the project due to energization timelines. And I emailed them and I hounded them probably 30 to 35 different times professionally, but it took that level of follow through. And I think is not just a regular customer, asking about the status of your project. These are critical tribal government projects that we implement for our community, especially during wildfire times where we need fire flow, where we need access to clean water. There's high demand usage. So again, I find the challenges with energy to be very complex based on the solutions. Do you want ownership models? Do you want to train your staff to be able to manage and operate these projects? I had the opportunity to speak at the Redwood Airport microgrid project, which is another example of resiliency in our region. And another challenge is learning how to maneuver through federal regulations, state regulations, working with your local partners, combining that with tribal energy goals, and how can those all meet, because there's different regulations for each, including the environmental permitting and some of the funding requirements. So you're having to kind of piecemeal tribal government, federal government, state and local regulations to come to a solution for one project. And sometimes that can also be very complex. So I find all of those to be challenges.
Definitely hear that. And I hear the need for the professional and persistent nudging.
Yes.
I have a hand from Elsa. Go ahead.
Hey, yeah, thank you so much for all of this. This is super helpful background. I think my question is related to the one that you just answered. I know that there's a number of projects who have attempted to kind of build microgrids, and I was thinking of one specifically here in Oakland called EcoBlock in Fruitvale. And I know there's been like a number of hurdles with the IOUs, not only in kind of everyday hurdles of being able to get the interconnection agreements actually pass through, which often take years and years, but specifically here because it's kind of crossing property lines, so that it then becomes in the realm of basically this block being its own utility. That's how the kind of it's being framed. And so I'm curious, we've had a number of conversations here about how tribal sovereignty and like regulations that are a little bit different up there kind of can change the circumstances that aren't necessarily possible in other areas. So I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to that, if that's even like an accurate assumption, or if, yeah, just what the kind of factors there.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And that's one thing that I didn't touch on was kind of the land status and jurisdiction issues. So when you come onto the reservation, largely you are on federal trust land. There's different kind of land statuses within that. You know, there's fee property that's kind of taxed and governed by Humboldt County. There's tribal trust land that is owned in trust status through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And there's allotted properties which can be single owned or multi-owned, but again, managed through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. One of the things that we're looking at is when you talk about projects crossing multiple properties, let's say a line crosses 3 different properties and they all have jurisdiction, that requires 3 different pathways for engagement and mitigation, which can add a lot of complexity. If it's along the state highway, sometimes you're working with Caltrans and the Department of Transportation on that, which is something that we're working with on our broadband projects. And so when there's a couple of sections within the valley where we're trying to attach aerial fiber because it's old ancient riverbeds and there's large rocks and cobble that are tons each. So we're having to look at aerial solutions. So we're attaching to these power poles, we're attaching to these telephone poles. And when you do the research on the Bureau of Indian Affairs documentation, you're not finding right of ways for those existing utilities. So it kind of is an issue when things that were established, the highway came through in 1930 and largely between 1950-ish, 1960-ish was when those power poles came through. So when you talk about the complexity of different property statuses, that might be a little bit different in Oakland, but it's still the same because it causes jurisdictional issues, it causes ownership and negotiation issues, and that might change per block. And in here, it definitely impacts because you're having to deal with private property owners, you're having to deal with tribal approvals, you're having to deal with the federal government, Department of Interior, Bureau of Indian Affairs on that. So a lot of developers don't understand that when you cross into reservation boundaries, it sets forth kind of a different nuanced jurisdictional and negotiation process that is complex, and they really don't understand that process. So I could see how, kind of in your case, solar projects could be complex as well, depending on location.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thanks.
definitely. They try to make it complicated for sure.
That might be one of the only changes that Trump is, and sorry to get political, installing because he wants to have streamlined permitting processes, which might not be great for the environment and protection, but it might help facilitate how projects are rolled out. So I'm not saying I'm for that, but that might be, you know, a benefit of more lenient permitting.
Totally. Gotta look on the bright side while we can. Um, got another question for you. Drawing from your past experiences, how can communities collaborate to support mutual sovereignty and self-determination? So obviously this touches on some things with like collaboration on the terrace project, but also like more broadly and in the past, like what do you have yeah, experiences in related to this?
Mm-hmm. I think that different groups, whether that's tribal, federal, state, local, you know, higher education institutes, what I've seen help make the most progress is to actually kind of sit down in person to talk about different goals. So you could bring to your table your, you know, your strategic plan over the next 5 years. You know, what is the other community or other stakeholder, if you will, working on? Do those projects align? Is there space for shared resources or for one project to help support the other? But I think regardless of entity, again, whether that's tribal, state, federal, local, private, I really think it takes sitting down and having sound plans and actually kind of dissecting what can be the benefits. You might have different goals on one side, but this is what we're trying to achieve. I think coming to the table and talking about these things, having planning events, looking at, you know, the GIS and overlap, energy metrics or whatever the project is. I think you absolutely have to communicate and correlate, and that's in my turn best done in person. And I think that that really helps everybody get on the same page to how you can really support and make regional progress.
Awesome. Getting a little political with the next question. What are some best practices for federal agencies to facilitate tribal energy sovereignty while respecting self-determination? And as a follow-up to that, are there any examples or cases that we could point to on like how to get this right?
If you find that, please let me know.
Okay.
I would love that resource. So sometimes federal consultation, whether that's on cultural resource impacts or environmental, the go-to play has been to send a letter or email to the chairperson or head of the tribe, right? And there's been so many instances by the time it trickled down to the person that's actually working on the projects. And for decades, they considered that true tribal consultation. Check the box, right? We sent notification to them. The government has been informed. But there's been times where they gave a certain timeline to provide comment or to apply for something. And by the time it reached me, for instance, that deadline had already passed. So the tribe had kind of missed our opportunity to provide comment or apply for that specific resource. So I really think they need to consider multi-factor engagement and just not saying we sent them a letter. Now the consultation is completed. When you talk about what they can do for tribal energy sovereignty, they need to do away with the match funding that's required or lessen that. It should not be a one-to-one match ever. We don't have the resources for that. We're rural in nature. A lot of times, and especially if we can't use federal funding, which a lot of tribes, there's a lot of federal to federal and government integration, maybe some flexibility on the amount of funds that could be used. Because I see these opportunities and people forward them to me. Oh, there's clean energy funding. You know, they're funding tribal nations. And when you actually read the requirements, the barrier to engagement is that match funding. You know, how are we going to magically come up with, you know, $25 million? I mean, if we had that, we probably would be improving our grid ourselves. So if they're really going to support tribal energy, they have to allow flexibility in the match funding or do away with that. And meet us where we're at. So it's some of those metrics that I already talked about, being low income, being in a fire threat district, having, you know, medical baseline and all of those metrics that are being gauged now and assessed, those should apply. So like our terrace project, we are having to piecemeal philanthropic, a potential private loan, the tax incentive credits, state funding just to make that match happen. And that's, I'm sure you've seen our business portfolio. If one of those things fail, we do not have the match funding to support the project and award. So if the federal government is going to really want to support tribes in this energy journey, they have to have flexibility and do away with some of those hard to reach requirements.
Gotcha. Thanks. And And I want to open it up. We had a comment from someone, Corey, if you want to say anything else about international models, very welcome to. And then I noticed we had some representation from PG&E and CPUC, and not to put you guys on the spot, but if you have something to share related to this project or what Linnea spoke on, definitely you're welcome to do so as well. And if not, we have more questions. So, yeah.
I already have somebody I want to call out. Can I do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good talk.
I'm gonna ask Corey Cadero if they have any questions. They will laugh at me.
Oh, hi, Linnea.
How are you?
I'm well. I'm just sort of over here multitasking as I'm listening in and catching up on what you're all up to. Let me see if I can. I guess the comment that I made about international models, it's something I saw recently that, you know, I'm really far out from school now and had not really thought of the international perspective before because we're so used to how things are and not how things can be. And so there's a group, I don't know what their name is, but they were talking about tribal funding on like an international model. And so some of our allies, we provide funding. It's just here's some money for the thing that you need. And there's no grant application, there's no requirements. Maybe there's a general requirement, but not a lot. There's other types of international aid we provide that have some strings. Hey, you can use it for these general purposes. Let us know how you used it. And please don't do X, Y, or Z just generally, and we'll continue to do this. And so we have this nation to nation model with other nations in terms of federal government. And so that's kind of been an interesting thing that I've been thinking about, thanks to these folks who I saw a presentation and I'm forgetting their names. So yeah, that was what the comment was about.
Thank you for that. And I think that that's going to have to happen more. I had recently watched a documentary kind of about the mineral extraction and where these clean energy elements are coming from, because the solar panels, the controllers, all of those things require rare minerals, which largely are from these international companies. And, you know, how are we getting those? Because when you look at energy resiliency projects, it is globally sourced. So I appreciate kind of that comment on international engagement, which I think probably needs to happen more and more. Also us supporting, so if the United States, just for instance, has a high demand for, you know, these solar panels, I mean, I think it would behoove us to provide comment to ensure those local communities where the minerals are being extracted from, that there's local benefits for that, which largely does not happen. So to kind of just give that a global scale, so I think we really do not only regionally need to have supportive partners, but the international model that you mentioned, I think, is maybe the next step on engagement. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks for adding that. I want to kick it over to Paco if you want to share any of the questions that you've been chewing on, or I can also read them.
Go for it.
Okay.
Choose,
All right.
choose the one you like.
Linnea, a lot of us, so because this is hosted out of the Energy and Efficiency Institute, many of us are working in energy research and adjacent fields, and we're wondering, as energy researchers, what are we missing?
What are you missing? I guess I would say, like, so for Shots Energy and Cal Poly Humboldt, right? We're deeply reliant kind of on their engagement to provide the technical support for that. And I know that's not there. So there's higher education institutes, whether that's a state university or other throughout California. And I think partnering with those 109 tribes and realizing that your research, your education level, that there could be tribal engagement, that could be regional. I mean, I think that that's a win-win, because some of you are working on your thesis document, some of you are working for study areas for your investigations and education. But I think maybe looking at those different models to see how you guys can further your research and education, and how that can also benefit tribal nations that do not have the technical expertise or in-house capacity. But I think the Cal Poly Humboldt Schatz Energy Research Center model is something that should be generated throughout the state and the nation. So that's become really critical to a part of our success. And I think it's a win-win because you guys are looking at, you know, the cutting edge technology and the different studies that can help different energy models. Chris, I know that you're kind of working on energy in relation to food waste. So for instance, we operate our transfer station and our solid waste management location here on the Valley. We don't do any sorting. We don't necessarily do recycling. So when the waste leaves here and is trucked out, I embarrassingly really don't know where that waste stream goes. You know, so I'm saying like there's multiple factors that you're working on because energy can be so multifaceted. But I think the graduate student level, the studies and the research that you guys can bring to the table would be so beneficial throughout the entire country. And maybe there's, you know, internships. I mean, that kind of the model and the benefits could be far reaching.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that partnership has been valuable. Yeah, it's been an honor to be working with you. I know I can speak for the team in saying we're very privileged to be supporting you and the utility up there.
Can you, I'm not sure I know what the partnership is about. Can you say a little bit about like how it works?
Sure. So maybe Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So the Schatz Energy Research Center is kind of a private business under Cal Poly Humboldt. It's not necessarily a for-profit business, but they've been established for I think at least 30 years. And they've been providing research and technical support regionally, and most recently have been working with most of the North Coast tribes. And our region is a densely packed in area where there's a lot of different tribal nations, and research staff, shot staff, students are able to work in correlation with the tribes for project management, for technical support. We have a lot of engineers in our teams. And obviously there's some professors that actually teach and also contribute to these. So we have the opportunity to work hand in hand with people that are actually, maybe they just graduated, maybe they're doing current research right now, and maybe they're skilled professors or staff that have 20 years of experience and have seen the progression of energy development. So that partnership, we try and seek grant funding to be able to support, you know, the staff costs, because, you know, everyone has to cover their overhead expenses. But largely what I've seen is complete dedication from these people, true partnerships, down to earth, humble, and they understand the regional needs. So, and I also think they're a great buffer because there's not the tribal political structure. They're not a business. They're really an educational kind of institution that might be able to mediate between the Energy IOU and tribes. And I think that that's also an important component as a trusted partner.
Yeah,
Amazing.
it's kind of a unique situation where, so it's a nonprofit entity. We're like an auxiliary of the university. And like Linnea said, we have a lot of students, grad students, faculty, but also a bulk of our staff are professionals solely. So we do have a lot of engineers, and we sit in this interesting intersection of like being a consultant firm, but also we're academic, and also we're a nonprofit. And it's a unique place to be working. That's my other hat. So I'm here as like Carice Geronimo PhD student, but in other times of the day I might have my shot center hat on. Yeah, thanks for asking.
we'll have to bring that model over to UC Davis.
Yeah, yeah, would love to build that out. I want to ask this question, Paco, that you wrote down because it makes me excited. And Linnea, wondering what are you excited for? Um, yeah, what are some things you're looking forward to in this work?
So many things. I think, and I'm assuming the people on here are the PhD students that are, obtaining their higher degrees and working towards that. I think if what I'm excited about is having a job that makes me feel like I'm achieving things in life, I'm seeing progress. We spend so much time during the day at work, right? It's almost kind of like your second family, if you will. And I think to be really engaged and I think to be fulfilled in life, you have to do something that you kind of love and are passionate about. And I'm constantly learning. And that's something that I truly love. So I like to feel like the time that I've spent, the dedication, the long hours, because sometimes I can't turn my brain off at night and then I'm thinking about projects all the time. And it's like, okay, work-life balance, work-life balance. But I guess what I'm most excited about is to help progress these projects, to make a difference, and to have my work mean something. That's something that's really, really important to me. I'm excited to learn. I'm excited to implement things and see progress throughout the region. I'm excited for tribal nations to kind of progress and take a stand. And if any small way, what we're doing here can impact that tidal wave of energy, if you will, to show that different models can work. You can work in partnership. You could have tribal ownership models. You could train staff. You could have careers for people. And you want local engagement. You want local support. So I think that's what I'm really excited about, to make progress, to do something that means something, and to hopefully in the end make a difference in this world.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Definitely a lot of that resonates, and it's such a good way to close us out on a positive note. I want to pause just for a little bit in case anyone has any last questions, but that was wonderful. Thanks, Linnea.